Hi, Jeff. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Angus.
And
been a
good to
while.
be back. Yeah,
Indeed.
These longer pauses between videos, they're certainly very fruitful for me for that, because they allow me to live with the ideas a little bit more, so like do reading around it and really take some of these pictures into meditative states. So like let them work on your soul for a while. So it feels good from that perspective.
Yeah. I have a feeling that we haven't really talked about it, but I have a feeling that we went in two different directions as relates to the dovetail reading or the research associated with the work. It'll be interesting to see and hear. I know you've done some research into the in the past and into research into some of the characters who are considered to be mystics or initiates in this day and age, and probably also the myths that he describes one after the other in this chapter.
Yeah.
And I found myself going back to the study of man, or fundamentals of human knowledge, or something like that, the human experience, or something like that, and see if I could plumb the depths of what the impulses are that are being tapped into, say.
Yeah. Perhaps just worth mentioning there before we dig into the text. There's a lot of stuff that we won't be covering. He mentions lots of myths in here, but he talks about it's like Buddha parables, Osiris. He talks about 12 labors, which we will look at in a bit more detail. He talks about the Argonauts, Prometheus, Odysseus, or the Odyssey. So there's lots of stuff that we're not going to cover in here, but it's all. I think we'll still. I feel confident that we're going to be able to pull some of the central threads, so that people feel encouraged to go and look at these myths themselves and to begin to appreciate what they stand for, what they are, their value, if you like, in the context of an evolution of consciousness, and also a deeper understanding of oneself as a psycho-spiritual being. So we'll I dare say that'll be coming up.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking through this, the arc of evolution as relates to what you were just saying. The physical part being the physical part being the last in the sequences, in some ways, the hardening. It'd be interesting, just very briefly, I think, also to recapture where we ended with the previous chapter, which is the question of the relationship between the mysteries and something like Platonic wisdom. The emergence of philosophy, and this is the way I read it, is juxtaposed with this with the mystery schools and the initiatory process in ways that I think that we're experiencing in this work, and then also in this time, a sort of graduation into the marriage of the mysteries and philosophical.
Perhaps actually, if we seeing you brought it up already there, perhaps we'll jump straight into that, because one of the bits of reading that I've been doing around this is looking at Pherecydes or Heraclitus, who we had a brief look at in the Riddles of Philosophy. He's really interesting because Aristotle pegs him, and I think this is fully justified, and I'll try to unpack it a little bit. He positions him in that turnover point of moving from mythical consciousness to mental consciousness. So this amazing evolution that we see going on in Greek consciousness, where you've got Hesiod and you've got Homer talking in completely mythical, non-philosophical, non-rational terms, Whereas in Heraclitus, who was the teacher, most probably, or one of the teachers, most probably, of Pythagoras, what we see is somebody who's got his foot like, or his 2 feet in both worlds. He's still got that old mythical consciousness, that seeing in pictures, which if you draw the arc across time to where we are now, it's the imaginative consciousness that Steiner is talking about, that is something that humanity now has to reacquire consciously through his own efforts. So Heraclitus has got his one foot firmly in this mythical realm when he's talking about Sacertus, Kronos, and Chthoni, and his ideas here, so like about triad of forces, interestingly, that are not in conflict with each other, but that actually represents like a high, the Trinity. It's like in the Christ, and these three beings, which they all form a whole, but they're non-distinct, again, like your definitions of the Trinity. But how these beings interact with a fourth force, it's like a cosmic serpent, which is called Ophione, I think, or something like that. And it's the interaction between these, I'm being very, very simplistic here, but these good forces, these true, good, and beautiful forces, and what happens when sort of like non-true or lying, ugly, and bad forces enter into this realm. So he describes that in sort of, you can imagine, it's like very mythical pictures, imagery you got there, but at the same time he's developing philosophical content, and using a form of reasoning, which then becomes the core part of, it's like some of the first philosophers after him, like Thales of Miletus and Alexander, and then going through there. So because I'll just repeat an important thing that I think I said there for the sake of the context of this, what we're going to be looking at today. It's the mythical picture consciousness that he's got going on there, which makes him very interesting, because he's radically different, but also, as we've mentioned before in a previous video, that we can still feel ourselves able to think with him, because he also has a modern turn of thought going on there at the same time, which, if you listen to that description, I mean, in a certain way, isn't that Steiner as well? Thoroughly modern thinking, but also a type of thinking that blows up the mind of people that are just stuck in that paradigm, people who aren't able to take the next step in the development of human consciousness.
Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad you did that, because it really puts some substance underneath this chapter. And then, we've been through Riddles of Philosophy, for example, and my favorite, I think, in hindsight, part of that favorite, whatever that word means,
amazing,
was the discussion of Pythagoras and Heraclitus, and what was happening. And then last time, or the time before last, we talked about Heraclitus and his almost modern day consciousness, right? And he had already separated off one of the Trinity, the fire, right? He'd already pulled off the sort of a one-sided soul aspect that sort of prefigured or was symptomatic of the way also the exoteric world would start to describe its own fragmentation into a duality. And that is so where we are right now.
Yeah.
We are so there. And I read this essay, I think I sent a link to you, by Janiel Schickler, the young man we've talked about before, who wrote the wonderful book I'll remember the exact title. I don't want to butcher it, but
About
in any
Hegel,
case,
you mean? Yeah.
Hegel and to Steiner and the underdetermined self and the fact of the resurrection, say that the mystical fact of the resurrection, though he doesn't use that term. In any case, he's describing a similar time that we're in now, where we're of two minds. We're of an analytical mind, and we're of an outgrowth of that analytical mind in postmodernism. And in a sense, you could say with and this is giving postmodernism its due to give Jordan Peterson a nod as relates to the way he describes that, like the devil its due. That in a sense in our consciousness, and I really think this is the case, and I think we can. I have confidence that this will come out in the if not today, then going forward, that in the analytical consciousness we are very much of this world, of the material world.
Yeah,
we don't understand it, but we're trying to desperately describe it. With postmodern consciousness, we're in the etheric world, where we have crossed the gate of death and into life, actually. But with the postmodern consciousness being born out of the analytical consciousness, we don't have a self. So we don't know where we are there. We are lost in a Nietzschean abyss, right? And so it's similar with Heraclitus and Pythagoras, except they were coming out of the mythical consciousness into the day waking consciousness.
Yeah.
And we're doing just the opposite. And the strife that we are embroiled in is a symptom of that. And it really awoke to me, so that I can truly be woke.
Wonderfully put. It's the way you were describing it. It also reminds me of, it's like a central thought that's been with me for the last couple of weeks. It's like both in meditation and reading, is this central idea of, it's like in normally if you describe to somebody as you felt you had an infinite darkness inside you, that sounds inherently negative. But it doesn't have to be like that, because this can be transformed into an infinite creativity, a connection with absolutely everything that exists. And this is a growing relationship that happens. So instead of being scared of the dark and scared of emptiness, it becomes this receptacle. It becomes a womb waiting to be fertilized, but not fertilized by content from the senses, but from something beyond the senses. There's lots going on here.
I'll just hint at something, because this is also something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking in the same terms that you're thinking of, but also the way in which interdisciplinary astronomy touches here. In this last chapter, we looked at the sort of mathematical termination of abstract
Cassini
mathematical
curves
formulaic notions, and there's an interruption, and that interruption is what we're talking about. It's the threshold interruption, and the continuity is something that we have full confidence in, because we've worked through the epistemological process enough to understand that the continuity is thinking.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking, we're actually already in that realm. And with a thinking self that we have created, we've made the mythological move to create with the gods in that case.
Wonderfully put. I love the way you connect. It's this continuity of thinking where other people's thinking stops. And just to take I'm not saying my thinking doesn't stop, but it doesn't stop. Or so the perspective that we're coming from, our thinking doesn't stop where people who are stuck in a materialist paradigm stops. So thinking about their roles, and what was the other guy's what's the name of the other guy who that interview that we commented on?
Brendan Dempsey.
Brendan Dempsey, that one there, where they they feel stuck. So like I look at Christianity and I say I can't go there, but so like there's something there, and those are like perfectly understandable criticisms, and it's perfect. It's valid to have that type of reticence, because what's actually happening in them is like their thinking's stopping. They haven't got it's like a conceptual framework that'll allow them to sort of say, no, that roadblock there is a fictitious roadblock. It's one that I've created within myself because of the the worldview that I have created within myself. My whole mental framework says it's a roadblock. Whereas for you and I, and for people who think like us, that is no longer a roadblock.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that it's not the content of our thinking that we're talking about, because everybody lives in both worlds. It's by virtue of thinking we live in the world that is born out of the death forces, say something like that, and that's the threshold that we're attempting to cross as humanity. I don't think there's any doubt about it, and I think that all of the strife right now and self-destructive behaviors are a symptom of that reality, because we're trying to avoid the death processes as the inevitable process of a birth into life. Right, and that's the way I see it, and I've never really fully seen it that way, more abstractly. But so I'm not saying that my thinking is better. I'm just saying that I don't self-limit. In fact, to put it better, I don't adopt a presumptive worldview that thinks it understands what thinking is. And I understand what this sounds like to some people. It's like you're just putting too much on this cognitive process that all in your head, all that sort of stuff. But it is as we've touched upon, it's the universal aspect of what it is to be alive. And it's the organizing principle and the ground of being, and we happen to be self-aware of it. And so we have to do something with it.
Yeah, wonderfully put. Okay, let's dig into the first text, which was the one that you chose. So I'll read it. Let's see if I can make that. Let's bring that over here so that I can actually read it. Okay, so with his ordinary, materialistic, logical conception of life, man creates gods for himself, or if he gains insight into this creation, he disowns them. The mystic perceives that he creates gods. He perceives why he creates them. He can, so to speak, see suddenly, or he can see beyond the natural laws of the creation of gods. It is the same with him as it would be with a plant if it suddenly acquired knowledge and learned to know the laws governing its own growth and development. The plant develops in innocent unconsciousness. If it knew its own laws, it would have to acquire an entirely new relationship to itself. The plant, which has acquired knowledge, would have before it as an ideal what the poet experiences when he sings about it, what the botanist thinks when he investigates its laws. The same is true of the mystic with respect to his laws and the forces working within him. As one who knows, he must create beyond himself a divine element. This was the attitude of the initiates toward what the people had created beyond nature. This was their attitude toward the popular world of gods and myths. They wished to perceive the laws of this world of gods and myths, where the people had a divinity, a myth. There they sought a higher truth.
My goodness, there's a lot there. you pick these quotes in sort of intuitive moments, when your soul is stirred to find something in them, and there's way more in it than that intuitive moment even could describe to yourself. But here we have like this here. I mean, there's so much that could be pulled apart here, but one of the things is that the initiate fully respects the ongoing woof and weave of the normal thinking in life, and the way in which people are naturally creating something transcendent of themselves. That this is part of what it is to be a human being. It's part of what it is to be uniquely a human being. And it's also our heritage. That which we're creating is something that is an inherent impulse as a wisdom that lies deep within us, that is unconscious. And I use that word very seriously because I'm somewhat allergic to the term because of the way it's been used in psychology, but it really reveals itself to be something quite different. That we can't access that directly, and so we make provisional creations that allow us to sort of settle into this inherent wisdom, this anthroposophia, that we're designed, that we are part of in the fabric of the universe, designed to not only embody, but to achieve a succeeding into deeper and deeper. And so that's what I hear here, and that's what I hear. The distinction he's making is the soul readying processes that so we could look at the world, for example, today, and we could look at analytical philosophy, and we could look at the way in which natural science as a materialistic philosophy has developed, and we can say these people are creating gods. It is a natural process. Of course they're going to do that. Their God is the God of atheism, or their God is the God of natural selection, or their God is the God of Big Bang and energy, and all of these things are provisionally created for the purpose of transcending oneself. But as we alluded to before, the problem with that is that without a self, without a relationship of the thinking that creates that self, and without that being transparent, then that world is an afterlife. It's a fixation on a sort of death cult of avoiding death at all costs, or living forever at all costs, the sort of transhumanist picture, as opposed to the careful walking across the threshold that we are then becoming participants, in which we are becoming participants of a process that gradually has us knowing that we need to dissolve the gods that we've created in order to create the divinity, to be part of the divinity that is arising within us. So that's where I say that unconscious is the supra-conscious. It's not the depths of animalistic desires, and that kind of picture of the conventional notion of unconscious.
Yeah, I do love the way he creates this picture of, imagine a plant that suddenly became aware of the own forces by which it grows, and really he's doing something that we'll talk again about. It's like in one of the texts that I chose, but it's this idea of, I live myself into a story. Whether it's a myth, whether it's a piece of modern literature, it doesn't matter. It's when I start asking myself the question, okay, so he's describing a plant. A plant's got living forces. Yeah, I can buy that. So like, what would it be like if I could discover the forces by which I grow? And so he presents us with that picture. And then I take that idea, and we were talking about like the darkness, or like this infinite creativity that manifests itself. So like it shoots through the darkness, so like out of a dream, for example. It's like these weird and wonderful things that can happen to us in our dream life. or when we get like a bolt of inspiration, suddenly a new thought that we know is new to us, where it sums up something, or we feel like we've taken a step forward in our thinking. These are all coming from somewhere beyond ourselves, but they manifest within ourselves. And it's these forces that, for me, when I read this part of the text, he's like getting us to consider, what are these amazing forces, these faculties of soul that we have within us, which, if we then begin to take conscious possession of, we then begin to, using the picture of the plant, we don't have to produce, we are not predetermined to produce a certain bloom or a certain fruit. If we've got this infinite source of creativity, then we become the masters of our own destiny. So yeah, it's wonderful stuff.
Yeah, this is great. He does this analogy, and it's more than an analogy, right?
Yeah.
Yes, because we are of the world, just like the plant is of the world. And if the plant could understand what it was, its own growth processes, what it would say would be something to do with the unity of all existence, because the plant is arising out of the unity and is a participant. The plant world is a participant in the atmosphere. It creates soil. It creates weather patterns. That world has an absolutely enmeshed relationship with the rest of the world. It depends on animals to move seed around through being digested in right. And so we are part of this world. Now, what that is, as relates to thinking self-consciousness, is not analogous to a plant. It is on a continuum. Somehow, therein lies the mystery.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned, just building on that thought that you were saying, another key thought when you use the word analogy, or the symbolic meaning of something. I don't know if it's the same for you, but when I hear, it is very easy for an analogy to be something that's out there. It's an association, but that is all it is. It's not something that changes me. It's not something that opens a new question in me. It's like opens a new possibility in me. So when people talk about analogies or symbolic interpretations, for me, they are, and unless I begin to use those pictures to ask myself the question, then they remain interesting. But so in no way do they as contribute towards some type of growth within myself, so a development of understanding within myself. And is it this next text that we look at? No, so I will mention it here, but somewhere else in this chapter, he talks about how Plato says that I'm not interested in the sophists and how they take apart the meaning of a myth. It's the myth of the Borea and the wind or something like that. People can go ahead and read it. He says, what I have to do is, if there's a monster in the story, I have to ask myself, does that monster live in me? And I have to be open and honest with myself and understand the extent to which it might do that. And that process that I'm describing there, or trying to intimate, is, I think, when we look at the last bit of text, which is a bit about the 12 labors of Heracles. I'll try to add more. I'll try to add more flesh to that, but it's got to touch me. And there's also a link there, I think, between even modern literary criticism, because in literary criticism, we it's an idea that's been left behind, but so there was this idea that there was a correct interpretation of a text. We know the mind of the author when she wrote that particular piece of literature. This is what he was trying to say, so like, end of story. And it's like a new consciousness has developed. I think it's as recently as within the last 70 years, where no, it's far more than that. It's like how the reader, him herself, engages with the text. That's what gives it. That's what gives it meaning. And one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is because, again, it's so tightly linked with like the lessons of the philosophy of freedom, which is like an awareness of how I see nothing in the world until I have concepts with which to identify it. So when we look at literature, or when we look at myths, what we're seeing reflected back to us is like as our own conceptual framework. But within that, there's like as a pregnancy to these myths and to literature, because they can open up like a different aspect of our thinking, or of our feeling life, or even of our will life, if we allow that literature to touch our souls.
Yeah, not to be too interpretive here, because Steiner himself avoids being overly interpretive of the myths, but one of the ways he does, very specifically in the previous chapter, and this also comes up here, is the way in which fragmentation, like, so first of all, I want to say that these myths arose out of the wisdom of the natural world, and as humans arose as in relationship to the wisdom of the natural world as an aspect of the natural world, and so as such, these are myths that not only have meaning across dimensions, but they have meaning across time. They're so pertinent, and so the idea of tearing apart, fragmenting, a character that is then spread out and then has to be regathered as a picture of the fragmentation and materials that the materialism has brought into our consciousness at this moment, or we have participated in bringing into a state of consciousness that is so fragmented as relates to the perceptual world without a self thinking, being ordered by this perceptual world. And so the order is going to be fragmented, right? And there's going to be less and less connections made, right? And so these are originating as warnings, right? Like the Narcissus myth is a warning that has it clearly outlasted the moment it arose, and will last probably forever. And it's the slightly, nobody would have said, oh, material science is fragmenting, like Heraclitus wouldn't have said that, or Democritus wouldn't have said that, or Aristotle or Plato. But they foresaw it for sure. The dangers therein lie, because they were honest in relationship with the monsters of their own nature, their own lower nature, which isn't to say the biological life body nature. That is what is at stake. That's what the battle is for, where the soul meets the body.
Okay, let's have a look. This is the first one that I chose.
His cognition spins for him the thread by which he finds his way when he enters the maze of the material world to slay his foe. The mystery of human cognition itself is expressed in this conquering of the material world. The mystic knows this mystery. It indicates a force in the human personality. Ordinary consciousness is unaware of this force, but the latter works within it nevertheless. It engenders the myth, which has the same structure as the mystical truth. This truth is symbolized in the myth. What then are myths? They are a creation of the spirit, of the unconsciously creative soul. The soul is governed by entirely definite laws. It must work in a definite direction in order to create beyond itself. On a mythological level, it does this in pictures, but these pictures are built up according to the laws of the soul. We could also say that when the soul progresses beyond the plane of mythological consciousness to the deeper truths, these bear the same stamp as the myths did before, because one and the same force is active in their creation.
Okay, so what's going on here? He's preceded this bit that we've just read with the myth of the Minotaur and Theseus, who goes into the maze, so like with a lays Ariadne's thread, goes and slaughters the Minotaur and makes it out. It's like slaying your monsters. So you've got this wonderful story, completely. It's like the most wonderful production of like any type of dream consciousness or imaginative consciousness. But importantly, there's a truth in there. There's a truth hiding behind this wonderful story, and it's the way Steiner unpicks it is, and I remember that also the first time I read this. It's this labyrinth. Is a dream picture. It's an imaginative picture for the windings of the mind, or the windings of the brain, and how we can get lost in there. And if we are focused solely on the exterior, like sense data, and if we just like look at that, this is the Minotaur that's waiting to pull us apart, to ravish us. There's similarities with the Medusa myth in a certain way here as well. It's like this being at the center of a maze, which is like inherently dangerous to man, and you have to take special precautions. You have to be gifted with it's like a shield from Athena and a pair of sandals from Hermes to make sure you can get in there, take the necessary precautions. It's like do the job, and so like get out there alive without being slain by these forces that are living within the soul. So this is in these pictures. There is, if you like, I need to be careful here. So one of the things that Steiner stresses is that myths were, it's like in this period of consciousness that we're talking about, they were the means by which it's like truths were conveyed. A little bit like the parables are used in the Bible, that Christ rarely, he does on occasions, but rarely explains his parables. He's using like this picture consciousness because people will they will let these pictures work on their soul, let them become part of them, so that the truths that are within these pictures, or these fundamental insights about our own inner natures, will grow out of. It's like a mere contemplation of these images. And one of the reasons it's like myths are particularly good for communicating truths of the soul spiritual nature of us is that for the simple minds will just let's say that those are rubbishy stories, and they can just like leave them be, so let's say strange imaginations, but there's no sense to them. But people as like that are it's like overly smart or overly intelligent can look at them and also it's like half dismiss them, recognize them as like interesting creations, but so like say, well, yeah, they've got nothing to do with science and that type of thing. But in this middle ground, you've got this idea that they can become like a grow bed, like a greenhouse for something if we begin to let these pictures work in us. And that importantly, they don't just have one truth to communicate. Sometimes these myths also can be understood like often from multiple levels. So, and this is why they're so rich and so interesting. You can go back to them again using like a more Christian concept, like a bread of life. There's something of you can keep feeding your soul with these pictures. You come up with an interpretation which is meaningful for you, where it's like it provokes new questions in you, or begins to perhaps even like give new answers, but you haven't exhausted the picture by giving it, by finding one understanding of it. You can still come back to it, like poetry as well, or even like reading a book. If you and I, we read a book, let's say we read a book now, and then we go back to get it in 2 years' time. If it's a good book, if it's written by an interesting mind, if I put it like that, then it's quite likely, because you and I have developed in those 2 years' time, that we will focus on completely different aspects of that book, despite it being exactly the same book as we read. And this is a very common phenomenon to anybody who's reread literature. It's like that you're often amazed. It's like, how did I not see this before? But there's an inner growth going on there.
So. Yes, and there's a lawfulness to that growth. So there is a seed, say, in our will, and borrowing now from Foundations of Human Experience, that is as real as our spiritual soul and physical bodies, that is also threefold in its potential for that which we will be. And that is part of the unfolding of the lawfulness of the way in which these myths are forecasting out of. I love that you brought the artist and bring the artist back, because the artists that are actually tapping into something deeply human, they don't even know really what story they're telling, say, in literature. Like, that's the way to interpret literature, is with the same creative forces that produced it, not the metaphorical interpretations that are useful. Now, having said that, he is also describing the reason and purpose of exoteric religion. And it's understandable that would be the only picture that people have of religion or of mythology, and that it was produced by hallucinogens and this sort of thing. And maybe hallucinogens were used in initiatory processes, but that doesn't mean that what was produced was manufactured, that didn't follow a lawfulness, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so we are. It's understandable that a Jonathan Rouse and a Brendan Dempsey would run into the notion of religion that would be either have to be accepted because it's a useful, pragmatic thing to accept that as something transcendent of yourself, because that is useful and it is helpful, and it does help frame the mysteries, which are part of it, which is why we have the religious and mythological world. The danger there, of course, is to then see that as only that. And so this is a delicate process that Steiner's going through here, because, as I've mentioned to other people and to you before we started recording, we're reading a book about Christ and the whole process as a fact, mystical fact. But we have to be careful about what we mean by mystical at this point, what we mean by fact at this point, and what we mean, the way in which we understand these processes as part of a continuum that is moving into our time, not just as explanatory principles, but in new ways in which we are having to participate in the creation of these forms, these religious, mythological, mythopoetic forms, and a respect for where they're coming from.
I think this thing about mystical fact, it's like the use of it in the title. When we come to the fourth bit about the labors of Hercules, I'll dig more deeply into like where my thinking goes in that direction, and why I see it as being very pertinent to the question that you just talked about. I'm just thinking, was there anything else? No. Okay, so I'll read your next text. Okay. So I dismiss these matters and, accepting the customary belief about them, as I was saying just now, I investigate not these things, but myself, to know whether I am a monster of a more complicated structure and more savage than Typhoon, or a gentler and simpler creature whose nature partakes of divinity. From this we see that a rationalistic, intellectual interpretation of myths was unacceptable to Plato. This must be considered together with the manner in which he himself makes use of myths to express meaning through them. Where he speaks of the life of the soul, where he leaves the paths of the transitory and seeks out the eternal in the soul, where, therefore, the ideas supported by material perception and intellectual thought are no longer present. There, Plato makes use of the myth. The Phaedrus speaks of the eternal in the soul. Here the soul is represented as a team of two many-winged horses with a charioteer. One of the horses is patient and wise, the other stubborn and wild.
I believe that's the one you selected.
Did I get them in the wrong order? So that explains why I got a little bit confused, because this is the point that I was making before. How Plato talks about the myth is useful to me. I'm not interested in early on in the text, he says, I'm not interested in what the sophists say, how they give natural or even, like as we might say today, so like natural scientific explanations for what was going on and how everything is directly related to sensory impressions. Plato says, no, I'm not interested in that. All I'm interested in the extent to which the dynamics going on in the myth might be connected to my own essential psycho-spiritual nature, my own true being. This is particularly important here for me, because what we'll see is, like in the next myth, is that these many of these myths involve a meeting with, it's like, the afterlife and other forces. So if there is an eternal soul that is sometimes clothed in a body and sometimes not clothed in a body, so these mystery centers that are the forces in society that create these myths, if their goal is to lead initiates or neophytes to an experience of that other world, then they're going to come back to those. They're going to come back from those experiences with their own pictures. Let's take one from the Bible, Jonah in the whale, being stuck in the belly of a whale for 3 days, type of thing. They'll bring that picture. And of course, it never really happened in reality. He wasn't in a whale. That's obvious. Okay. But there are a lot of psycho-spiritual truths in what's going on in that story with Jonah in the well and the myths that Plato is talking about here. And he's saying, that's what I'm interested in, because what that will do is that will help me grow as like a deeper experience, deeper direct, instead of like merely theoretical experience of what is this eternal nature of me that's living there. Yeah. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I find myself this feeling of caution with this whole process because, well, he's very cautious in relationship to this process of leading up to the point at which the turning point of time, say, occurred, and what changed as relates to the utilization of myth as something like psychoanalysis, right? That's or dream interpretation, and that's not what Plato's talking about here, right? And I think it is also what he's talking about, but he's also talking about the very processes that reveal that allow these myths to arise in the first place as creations that not only reflect a reality, but are the process of the way in which reality creates itself, something like that. Yeah. And then the way we can participate in that. I hate to beat a dead horse there, but I don't think, and I don't think this is where we're heading, that we're going to end up with that story of Christ and the resurrection. That what we can pull stuff out of that and that make analogous metaphors for life, and that it's all conceptual, right? And it is conceptual, and it works on the level of the way life arises and re-arises and resurrects, something like that. So keeping that mystery at its what do you say, at its budding state.
Yeah. And at the same time, we can also remind, so like how just in the last episode we looked at the world soul spread out on the cross of the earth, which already is like becoming suggestive, and then that will, we can just leave it there for the moment. Yes, caution is certainly needed.
Yeah, if I could distill this chapter, it would be something about, the previous chapter was about putting forward the notion of human personality as a real aspect of participatory divinity, say, creation. That this chapter has something to do with the nature of the soul as a lawful reality that manifests in human beings in a certain way, but also exists in the world, in the interiority of the world as we know it. And that the mystery is somewhere there that is undifferentiated, and it's still undifferentiated in us.
Okay, I think that takes us beautifully to our last slide.
The 12 labors imposed on Hercules are seen in a higher light when one reflects that before the last and most difficult one, he was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. At the command of King Eurystheus, thank you, of Mycenae, he was to fetch Cerberus, the hound of hell, from the netherworld and take him back there again. To be able to undertake a journey into the netherworld, Hercules had to be an initiate. The mysteries led man through the death of the transitory, and thus into the netherworld. Through initiation, they wished to save the eternal element in him from destruction. As a mystic, he could overcome death. Hercules overcame the dangers of the netherworld as a mystic. This justifies the interpretation of his other deeds as stages of the inner development of the soul. he overcame the Nemean lion and brought him to Mycenae. This means that he became master of the purely physical force in man. He tamed it. Next, he slew the 9-headed Hydra. He overcame it with firebrands, dipping his arrows in its gall so that they would never miss their mark. This means that he overcame lower knowledge, the knowledge of the senses, through the fire of the spirit. Out of what he had gained from this lower knowledge, he drew the strength to see the lower world in the light belonging to the spiritual eye.
Okay, so much interesting stuff going on here. I think perhaps one of the first things it's important, at least from my perspective, to emphasize is this is, if you believe in the eternal nature of the soul, so like, and you've convinced yourself of that, or so like your culture allows you to believe it, then a certain percentage of the population are going to say, okay, where do I buy the tickets? What do I have to do to get there? And these mystery centers, like the Eleusinian mysteries, these are centers, and there were dozens, if not hundreds, I don't know the number, but it's like in the ancient world, this was an integral part of, it's like what society was. You had this group of people that they trained themselves. They went to school, but they didn't do it to learn maths and science and literature and that type of thing. No, what they did is they were putting their soul through various experiences to prepare themselves to enter into, it's like the 3-day or 3.5-day sleep, or the temple sleep, as it's called, so like in other contexts, where the person to be initiated leaves, quite literally, it's like their spiritual nature leaves their body, and then that body then becomes, if you like, it's like a receptacle. It's like an egg, an unfertilized egg. It becomes something that is capable of receiving, it's like, impulses from this spiritual world. And then when it returns back to the body after its 3.5-day absence, it's able to communicate. It's like those impulses that come from the other side. And so when you get a story like Hercules, where you know at the end of the story he's going to go to the netherworld, you've got a description of some of the type of soul growth that has to happen in a person before he or she can actually undertake that journey into like life beyond life, into the realms of the dead. And so one of the things, there are 12 labors. So you've got the Nemean lion and you've got the Hydra going on there. So let's just take the Hydra one, where it's that well-known image where it's like Hercules is there and he's sort of chopping off the heads, and oh shit, there's another one growing there. This isn't a good idea. And he's got a friend there, can't remember his name. But so it says, it's like, you need to be careful. You know what? We'll do some teamwork here together. You chop off his heads, chop off its heads, and I'll use a fackel, or it's like a torch, to cauterize it so that a head can't grow back. And what we have to do in ourselves is ask ourselves, it's like, what processes in us might represent that? And he talks about here, it's like the firebrands that are talked about here. It's like spiritual understanding, which is able to stymie or to control, it's like, the growth of unhealthy forces. And so what's quite clear is that this event never happened on the physical plane. There wasn't some Hydra somewhere. I mean, that's obvious. But it's these soul processes that are going on there that are being reflected in this story. And one of the interesting things is it's like the extent to which many of these the labors of Hercules they involve a how can you call it, a purification, or it's like a perfecting of your own moral abilities. And so if we take, for example, I think it's the fifth labor where he has to clear out the stables. It's like there's this stables, Augean stables, I believe it's called, hadn't been cleaned for 30 years. So there's a load of dung there, and he gets you've got to clean this. You've got 1 day to do it, and you're only allowed to use your hands. And so what he does is he redirects the flow of a river. It's like it's all done and dusted in no time. So again, it's like wonderful imagery, but what's like aspects of of our own soul life might that represent? It's like you've got this taking on of a task which might seem to be demeaning. It's like the humility. Yes, I'll do this shitty job. It's like washing of the feet a little bit. It's like I am a servant here. I don't have to say I'm king and I don't have to do these type of jobs. But also this allowing the natural forces or nature's forces to work with you. It's like in this purification process. The flowing of water often can have like both a destructive, like flood-like effect, but it can also have a purging effect. And this is something within his soul that as a neophyte, somebody to be initiate, he has to develop these forces within himself to be able to complete the task that's been set. But the task that's been set is really like having developed a certain level of inner moral strength, and that's the picture that we're seeing. So yeah, that's a couple of thoughts on that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts coming up there.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. Right. So finally, through my thick skull, I get it. Right. These trials and tribulations taken up are moral strengthening for the crossing of the threshold into a non-mythological reality.
Exactly.
Right. It's not mythological. It's not where myths arise. Let's say it's where they arise from, and for us in this age, in this consciousness, and as this arc describes it, we have gone through the exoteric processes of either morally picking up our bed and walking or not.
Yeah.
And we are in a crucible moment. So I really think of this evolutionary curve like this, and that here's Pythagoras and Heraclitus, and they could Pythagoras and Heraclitus, and they could see the dangers of what they were tapping into, and they could see the great benefit, and so they made secret schools out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that followed through, and then we come to Steiner on the upside, and then it's time to let it's time to make transparent this process.
Yeah.
And so we're moving out. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. So interject.
And this is where the Christ impulse becomes absolutely key, is because these processes could only be, it's like the illumination, so like the connection with the other side of reality, with the realm, with the spiritual realm, with the realm of the dead. In these mystery times, so you had to prepare yourself for your 3.5 day sojourn out into the spiritual worlds. But it all had to be done within the confines of the mysteries, because you actually had to have a guru, a psychopomp, or somebody who was going to actually look after your body so that it didn't decay whilst you were out of it, so that for 3.5 days. And this is what fundamentally changes when Christ, which we'll get to later, but so through Christ coming to the earth, through that spiritual impulse that's like lived in the body of Jesus of Nazareth, it's like humanity became capable of having those direct otherworldly spiritual experiences. It's like an initiation experience without leaving the body. They could leave the body, but they could do it under their own steam. There's still the purification. It's like the inner strengthening. That all still had to happen. Nothing changes on that front, but you weren't reliant on somebody else to do that process for you. Christ made what was available to a few select individuals that lived in these mystery centers became available for those that chose to believe for the whole of humanity. And this is what really pissed off the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It's like he was selling the company secrets. He's like selling the recipe of Pepsi to the world. It's like, go guys, make your own.
Yeah. Yes. That's really helpful. That also happened to Plato and Aristotle, right? And anybody who deigned to, and people still, right? It's still happening. Yeah. Persecution of people who would start to reveal the mysteries. And in this, I'm glad you picked the Hercules. Was this the Hercules one? The
yeah, 12, that's right. Hercules, yeah. The 12 labors. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And so the inevitability of the Hades experience, of the death experience, is sort of comes full circle to the beginning of this discussion, is that we are in this time between worlds now, and we are on both sides of the threshold. Mm-hmm. And it is not possible to go back. That was when we were reading with Matt's group, when we were reading Philosophy of Freedom, the notion of freedom itself, this epistemological operational process that is the description of freedom, is a terrible responsibility, because that is exactly where we're going. We're going further and further, in a sense, into matter in order to spiritualize or free matter. And that, again, this is more for the conversation that follows in relationship to the mystery surrounding the reality, not the mythological configuration of the soul of the world becoming flesh and individualized as an experience of that which is inevitable, and that which we are inevitably right now involved in. That's my claim. And that postmodernism is a description of a report from the other side. And this analytic philosophy is the actualization of the death process. That's my mythology for the moment.
Can you do one more of the episodes? It's the fourth labor, where he has to capture this boar. He's not allowed to kill it, and this is another strange thing. It's like in these myths, it's like weapons. You're not allowed, or in certain of the labors, you're not allowed to use weapons. So, and the boar, it's he has to. It's actually the hind, which is the third myth. He has to. These two are fairly close together. That's why I'm getting them mixed up. You've got the what's it called? The Amanthian boar and the Cyrenian hind. These are both two beings that he has to, or two wild beings that he has to capture alive. He's not allowed to kill them, but he has to conquer them in different ways. So, so with the hind, he has to spend a year chasing this hind, and eventually, so like he drives it into the snow, and it gets tired, and finally, he can sort of like put it on his shoulders and sort of like take it back to the tyrant king who's like set him these challenges. And here we've got like another like a moral aspect of us. It's persistence. It's like the not giving up aspect that's coming to the fore here. And I'm just wondering if I got anything on the.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go for it.
But also that which we cannot leave behind, right? We can't leave these wild aspects behind. We can't kill them. Mm-hmm. We have to find a way to subdue them in order to integrate them. Right? Yeah. And the depth psychologists would love this moment that we're, talking in sort of meta-modern depth psychology, Ken Wilberian terms, right? And it's very important to understand that Wilber himself was very quiet about Steiner's influence in relationship to how integral his integral picture arose. And it's this reality of the soul and of the depths of the soul that we take across the threshold, so that body doesn't decay, it stays alive, right? Because these are the aspects of ourselves that are part and parcel of this existence, this living existence, and we can't go around them. This would be spiritual bypassing if we killed the hind, we slayed the dragon completely. All of these mythologies have this sort of relief coming from that which has been subdued.
It's really important that you stress that some of these, there are certain aspects within our soul that we have to placate, or even to exterminate. But exterminate is even with the Hydra, whose heads he cuts off, it doesn't die. He cuts off his head. It's like it's stuck in a hole and a stone's put on it, and that becomes the poison in the blood is poisonous, which he can then use in other parts of his labors. So what you said there is really important, that it's not about a killing and destroying, it's about the overcoming, and also but still managing to retain it's like the useful elements. It's like for our own growth. That's like within this process.
Understanding that all of these lawful processes in the soul are part of what makes up our self.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Without a self living in the world birthed by death, we are lost in a sea. We are lost in the dark. We're lost in the abyss. We're specters. This is the thing about this moment and the turning point in time. But this is the thing about this moment, is that you just look at people who are purchasing these ideologies in present day time, and they walk around with that they're like ghosts. They're not oriented to reality, because they are actually living in the world after death, in a certain sense, in their postmodern consciousness. But they haven't brought a subdued and self-defined self that they had to destroy the identity of and resurrect on the other side. In fact, they're holding desperately on to that identity.
Yeah. I suppose one final note that I want to make in connection to it's like other Steiner works is like, if you look at any of his if you look at knowledge of higher worlds, if you look at occult science, if you look at theosophy, where he describes paths into the higher world, there's always there's the meditative practices, but he's insistent that it's about morally perfecting yourself, purifying yourselves of those forces that live within you, which will end up destroying you if you don't learn to manage them, if you don't manage to like pick up that ball and put it on top of your head, or to tie the legs on the Cyrenian hind so that they can't have these wild, unpredictable, destructive effects in your own soul life. And I think one of the reasons I pick up on that is when you get certain people, I won't mention any names, but when you get certain people that become particularly influential, for example, in the anthroposophical movement, and they talk about development of clairvoyance without talking about the need for also a moral development of the character, that should already, in my mind, be a warning sign that, okay, so if I suddenly do get initiated into the other world and I haven't prepared myself, what are all the forces that I'm going to be open to? And perhaps the reckless might say, well, it doesn't matter. But what Steiner indicates is that no, prepare yourself morally, because there's some real moral battles ahead with yourself.
And I don't want to go all Aubrey Marcus here, but and the importance of sensuality as a spiritualized process. This is I think handled the way that he handles the Odysseus myth as a myth rather than as some sort of fictional metaphorical story, because it's really close to something that was, but it's too crazy. It's not an account of anything that is meant to be like life. It's a process of, so you can't like there are people now who criticize that for its sins against ideologies, say, but you're just reading it wrong. You're not there with it as a process of initiation yourself, and that sensuality is impossible. Sorry, moral imagination is impossible without a deepening and souling relationship with your sensual reality, which isn't to say
it's part of your inner life.
I'm not talking about Aleister Crowley here. I'm talking about what it is to be a human being in a way that is not a victim of the perceptual world around us, but really becomes intimate with it, including that which is of this world ourselves.
On that erotic note, I'll do the honors.
Beautiful.